the German climate pavilion at COP29 in Baku. Germany. Climate solutions, fast and fair.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you to everybody who was able to make it here despite the early morning hour. Today, we will be talking about methane emissions. But first, let me present myself. I am Julian Schwartzkopff. I work for the environmental organization Deutsche Umwelthilfe, or Environmental Action Germany. We are part of a group of NGOs working on methane emissions reductions across sectors, the Methane Matters coalition. And we have entitled this event Applying the Climate Impact Brake, because methane is an extremely dangerous greenhouse gas with a global warming potential of more than 80 times that of CO2 over 20 years. So methane emissions reductions are one of the best ways to really get short-term emissions reductions effects quickly and avoid meeting dangerous climate tipping points. If I'm looking at my phone, I'm not checking my messages, but rather my moderation notes. We have two panels today. We are starting with a first panel where we have a number of methane champions and members of the Global Methane Pledge present what their countries are doing. We have State Secretary Stefan Wenzel from the German Federal Ministry of Economics and Climate Action. We have Michael Ivenso from the Nigerian Climate Change Council, Director of Energy, Transport and Infrastructure, I think so, and Jinsun from the South Korean NGO Solutions for Our Climate, Head of Methane at that organization. Please, if I could ask all of you to come to the stage, and then we will hear three keynotes before we move to our second panel, which will deal more with the implementation challenges in different sectors.
Good morning, sir. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for being here. All right. Yes. State Secretary Stefan Wenzel. Germany is a methane champion, and you have been spending a lot of time speaking about methane over the last few days. What is Germany doing to apply the climate impact brake and meet the Global Methane Pledge objective of reducing emissions by 30%?
Yeah, thank you very much for organizing this event and the possibility to talk together and to discuss on the panel here this morning. We just saw last year an all-time high of methane emissions, and that is a huge problem because methane is already responsible for about 30% of global warming, and that's a really big amount. And so it's very important that we fight against methane emissions, but don't reduce our ambitions on the CO2 front. And when we talk about methane, we must see where does it come from. What are the anthropogenic sources of methane? And one is, for example, waste management. Another one is the production of oil and gas. And another source is agriculture and land use. And so let me begin with the oldest activity we had in Germany. We are working since more than 2 decades on waste management to reduce methane emissions. And we banned organic waste from going to landfills, and I think it's necessary that all countries have a new organization of their waste management. if we put organic waste on a landfill, we have methane emissions for decades. And in Germany, we decided that that no longer be possible. We put the organic waste in biodigesters, composters, or if untreated, it's been incinerated for heat and power generation. But first, we try to reduce the amount of waste as much as possible. That's the first. Reduce, recycle, reuse wherever possible. And then the rest of the organic waste in biodigesters, composters, and a part of incineration. And therefore, we can reduce our methane emissions from waste up to 90%. And we also try to use the methane from old landfills we had before we started this. And so this is a very complex organization, but it's it's a very good option to handle methane emissions from waste. So one important point is to use best practice and bring waste management solutions to other places where we still have landfills all over the world, and there are a lot of them. The second point is we phase out hard coal. Hard coal mines are strong emitters too of methane, and even if you stop it and do nothing with the coal mine, it emits methane. And so we introduced a feed-in tariff for the use of methane from hard coal mines. We take it and then use it for energy production. And on the other hand, these mines getting fuller and fuller with water. They are flooded, so it's reducing over the time. But in the meantime, we must reduce the amount of methane from the hard coal mines, which otherwise come to the atmosphere. And with all that together, we could reduce the amount of methane from these two sources up to 90%. And but some say, okay, that's the long-hanging fruits and the mid-hanging fruits, and Germany picked them already. But that's not the reality, because we are also consumers of methane, of natural gas from other regions all over the world. And so if we're importing natural gas, we're importing also methane, and we're importing the footprint of the production of natural gas in other regions all over the world. And so we implemented together with our European partners the EU Methane Directive. And the aim of this directive is, first, transparency. We want to know what is the methane footprint from gas from USA or from Qatar or any other producer. Norway, we have a lot of methane, a lot of gas we buy in Norway, for example. So first we want to have transparency. Then we're working on efficiency, reducing more and more and more the amount of gas we're using for households, for heating, whatever, for power plants. And on the second step, we want to find out which are the producers with the baddest footprint, and if they want to import to the European Union, they have to pay a fee in the future if they have a bad footprint for the natural gas. So on one hand, we must phase out as far as possible from fossil fuels. But in the meantime, we must reduce the amount of methane coming to the atmosphere. That's both waste management, hard coal management, and import of natural gas where we are working on. And maybe later you discussing also the agriculture sector, but that's not in our responsibility directly as a Ministry for Economy and Climate Action, but because we're interested on methane reduction, this is an item we care about too, and because it's an important emitter too.
Thank you so much. To summarize, waste, energy, two areas where Germany is already doing quite a bit and has taken some measures, in the latter case as part of the EU as well with the EU Methane Regulation. If you allow me one quick follow-up question, you already hinted agriculture is not yet in that list. If you could choose like your top 2 or 3 policy actions that we would need to take to reduce agricultural methane emissions, even though it's not in the purview of your ministry, what would those be?
I think we must, that's not an official position of my ministry, but I used to study agriculture and economics, so maybe it's what I think what's necessary. I think it's necessary to put the agriculture sector in Europe also under a CO2 price system. We have an emission trade system with a CO2 price for the industry, for electricity production. That is our emission trade system 1. It's in power since 15 years. And now we want to implement the emission trade system 2 up from 2027. And it will implement mobility and heating of houses. And then there's one sector open, that's agriculture and LULUCF, land use and land use change. And I think we must implement this sector also in a CO2 price system. And they had a wide range of options to reduce emissions. For example, in the way they do agriculture, and they can have a bigger amount of humus in the soil, which saves the storage of CO2, to handle swamps in another manner, and even there are a lot of other options they have, and that there could be with the CO2 price a good incentive. I think we must check all these options and use them.
Thank you very much. Food for thought for our second panel. So we move next to Michael Ivenso, Director at the Nigerian Council on Climate Change. Mr. Wenzel already mentioned the EU's oil and gas imports. One of the countries producing some of that oil and gas is, of course, Nigeria. And if you allow me one more remark, we've been speaking a lot to IMU over the past few days, which has presented as well the results of their first, of the first year of the methane alert and response system, and it was stressed to us specifically that Nigeria was one of the few countries that actually responded to an alert once it was received. Still, of course, methane emissions persist as a problem. What is Nigeria doing as a methane champion to address it?
Good morning once again, and thank you for having me. First of all, let me say we are really proud of the work we're doing with Germany as a co-signatory to the Global Methane Pledge. For Nigeria as a petrol-dependent country, you would already recognize that the methane emissions from the industry is one of the significant ones. If you look at the World Bank gas flare tracker for June 2024, Nigeria is somewhere about number 8 or number 9. And that for us is significant. And part of our ambition as a country is to exit that list completely. For that reason, the Nigeria Gas Flare Commercialization Program really is one that's looking at opportunities for driving investments into commercializing gas flares as one of the very important pathways to methane abatements in the sector. And sometime about 2 years ago, we launched and operationalized the upstream methane emissions regulation, really requiring operators to meet a certain minimum criteria for keeping methane in the pipe, not outside of the pipe, right? And the idea here is to help to close some of the energy gap that we experience as a country. For a country of about 230 million people, the energy gap is really, really significant, meaning about close to 110 million people do not have access to energy at all or adequate energy. And therefore, we find that the gas flare commercialization is one very important way to help harness gas that would otherwise have been flared and convert them into usable energy that could be important in helping economic activities, especially amongst those people who don't have access to this energy, people in underserved areas, in rural communities, men and women who can't afford to purchase the normal gasoline and diesel that we use normally. Although, as you can imagine, part of our ambition is to ramp down on the use of fossil. I mean, coming out of a COP28 global stocktake, the global aspiration really is for countries and parties to the agreements to reduce their dependence on fossil fuel. And for us, part of our response to the low carbon transition risks is to move away from fossil and diversify our economy into other areas that are productive, agriculture, for example, and so forth and so on. That brings me to the other part of the conversation in terms of what we are doing as a country. So in moving away from fossil fuel, we have expressed in our NDCs that we intend to raise our ambitions in methane emission abatements in the agriculture sector as well as waste management. For the simple reason that it's often assumed that oil and gas actually contributes more methane than agriculture subsidy. But when you combine agricultural and landfill and land-based interventions, you actually have more methane overall in that sector than you have in oil and gas. And that means that, like here said, there's need to improve or increase ambitions in the agriculture sector by focusing on some of the most important emitting activities such as rice production, which also speaks to food security and livelihoods for smallholder farmers who practice rice in the rural areas, and also looking at reducing methane from livestock, enteric fermentation from ruminant animals. And in that respect, part of the work we're doing with the European Union delegation in the country is to support what they call the NIME program, Nigeria Methane Emissions Reduction Program, that focuses on oil and gas, waste and agriculture sectors. And that means that we are looking at helping to develop the data and the baseline MRV system that tells us how our measurements and what we're doing in these different sectors to be able to abate. Yes, you want to be able to perform the actions to reduce them, but you also want to be able to record them, because you have to be able to report. And it's important to have the tools and resources to be able to collect the data and be able to report them as well. Now, I want to mention something, going back to oil and gas. In my role as a director for energy, what I consider as one of my biggest achievements this year is working with the National Oil Company to convince them to join the OGMP 2.0. And I'm glad to announce that they have actually signed up to OGMP 2.0, which means that collectively, as part of our national ambition, we are putting our oil and gas sector at the forefront of our decarbonization. And therefore, the focus on providing the tools and resources and the regulatory environment to transition the oil and gas industry away from emissions really for us is high on our agenda. And that's what we want to continue to do, working with partners such as Germany and the rest of them, Japan and other members of the GMP, to really increase ambitions towards the 1 gigaton target. And for us, we also recall, global cooperation is at the heart of climate action, right? And therefore, it's important that we continue to exchange ideas and look at the data and best practices from our partner countries in the GMP to look at opportunities for reducing methane across all these 3 sectors. We're really disappointed when Germany really rolled back the URO opportunities that was used to finance some of the important methane reduction opportunities in the oil and gas industry. But we recognize that that's an important part of the German administration. But we also look to working with Germany in the future to look at what other sort of cooperative mechanisms are available to help support some of these important interventions. So 1, oil and gas methane is really important, gas-led commercialization, and 2, the regulatory environment to incentivize companies to move away from that. Secondly, the agriculture sector, focusing on the high methane emitting activities of livestock and rice production, while also improving access to food security and opportunities for the women and children who are highly impacted by these activities. So these are some of the things that we're doing in Nigeria in this sector as well.
Thank you so much for running us through that. If we have the time, if our next speaker does not have to leave too early, I would like to ask you one quick follow-up question. Mr. Wenzel already mentioned the EU Methane Regulation and the import standards. Well, are you worried about market access to the European Union going forward? Or do you feel that the regulations that you have on upstream are sufficient to meet the import standard in the future?
So if I understand you correctly, you were asking about a concern about the European standards, right? Yeah, so for an export-dependent country like us, yes, we're concerned, but not worried. We're concerned because we really want to look at that as an opportunity for us as a country to move away from our over-dependence on fossil fuel. That's one. But as a matter of policy, in Nigeria, gas is our transition fuel. So as we make the investments to ramp up our installed base of renewable energy between now and sometime around 2045, 2050, gas will remain that as we move away from the high-emitting fossils. Then as we ramp down towards a net zero target for 2060, where we should have either the mix could be skewed in favor of renewables in terms of install base for what our energy base will be. So what that means that between now and then, our exports are going to be subject to a lot of, should I say, sanctions or taxes, as the case may be. I mean, for example, CBAM and the European methane rules. So it's important for us as a country to be able to incentivize our operators, both on the gas and the petroleum side, to really look at ways to apply technologies to reduce overall footprints. The Nigeria LNG, which is our flagship gas company, is already a member of the OGMP 2.0, and we are incentivizing and also encouraging them to continue to escalate their reporting level up onto OGMP 5.0, right? OGMP 5. Because that really is the gold standard for measurements and identifying that you as a company, you as an operator, you are doing the necessary tasks to be able to meet with minimum standards that are acceptable globally for footprint measurements. So, though it's a concern, it's also an opportunity for us to do that. And so, investments in tools and resources that helps to abate methane in our production is really becomes important. Not only is it an investment, but it also encourages production and cooperation with our partners in Europe. As you know, we all have this common global aspiration towards 1.5. That is going to be part of our own effort to contribute to that overall aspiration. So In terms of concern, yes, we are concerned because of course, there's going to be investment required to do so. But we also see that as a challenge and an opportunity to be able to transition our industry to a cleaner, a more transparent and responsible, global cooperation.
Thank you. That's good to hear. And now I'm excited to hear more about what is going on in South Korea and also Japan. We have slides for this, which would be good to bring up here. Ms. Jinsun, who will be presenting, I feel compelled to stress, does not represent the South Korean government, but instead works for an NGO and will present what the governments in question are doing. Thank you, Jinsun. Take it away.
Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be here to hear the insight and what is happening in the other side of the world. I'm from South Korea, which is one of the Asian country which actually are very responsible for methane mitigation in the world. I want to say that methane is not one country's issue; it's a more global issue as we are connected through trading. So first, South Korea has joined this global methane pledge in 2021, and at the end of last year, this country has announced this national methane roadmap. According to this methane roadmap, we see the energy somehow takes the least responsibility for methane reduction of these three sectors. But we also say that what South Korea has somehow achieved so far in terms of methane championship, we have one sub-national government which called Chungnam, which is comparable with Westphalia, which is the biggest coal production region in Germany. That is actually the biggest greenhouse gas emission region in South Korea, but it has announced that it's committed to establish some national level methane roadmap by 35% by 2030, which is very impressive because the national methane roadmap is only limited to 30% methane reduction by 2030, but some national government want to increase their ambition in methane mitigation. Third thing I want to address is a company-level methane reduction effort. Last year, Korea, Japan has announced the Clean Initiative, which basically frame how to collect this methane data from LNG value chain. We have the biggest LNG importer in the world, which is called Korea Gas Corporation, KOGAS so-called. And there is also JERA, which is comparable to Korea Gas Corporation. The framework is somehow simple. This would be increase the methane data transparency in this region so that this company would have a beginning of the work for methane reduction. We think data transparency would be the basis to commit to this methane reduction at company level. But unfortunately, we think this effort would not be enough to meet this 1.5 degree target in the world. Korea, actually, in terms of total methane emission, it's basically not that much. Maybe that's only 27 million tons of CO2 equivalent in 2021. But by population, it's around 50 million people. And in terms of GDP, we have around 30,000 USD per year. Per capita. So we say that the responsibilities for the country should be much more than they should do, reduced by only 30% by 2030. So we have modeled and we projected how much this country should commit to this methane reduction. We understand that from the perspective of population, the methane reduction target should not be only 30%. It should be actually more than 50% by 2030 in order to meet this 1.5 degree target. But we also did a projection to understand the sectoral reduction target. We understand that energy should be more, energy sector should be more ambitious to meet this carbon neutrality target of the country. South Korea has announced a carbon neutral plan which should be realized in 2050. In 2050, many countries have announced that this country will be fossil-free energy industry. So South Korea is also one of them. But we see this energy sector reduction from 2050. The energy sector should actually reduce the methane emission even out of the zero, which means this reduction should happen outside the country. And we see this, South Korea is the fourth largest importer of coal and oil and fifth largest importer of gas. In terms of LNG, South Korea is third biggest importer after China, Japan. So we have calculated the potential of South Korea's methane reduction if we committed to import standards like EU, we could reduce 50 million tons of CO2 equivalent. So we again say that we really welcome European Union's import standard. Korea, Japan, these Asian countries should join European Union's ambition to contribute to methane reduction globally. We think currently we have this national methane roadmap and according to the global methane pledge, but that's not really enough. We need more ambitious target to meet this 1.5 degree target, but as always, we should introduce a methane import standard in South Korea. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for me to pose one additional question before we need to close out this panel, and some of us need to attend our next COP events. So you've mentioned the CLEAN initiative. CLEAN, of course, an ambitious name for a coalition on LNG imports, but where do you think the major gaps are in the initiatives? What needs to be done to strengthen it, and can it maybe develop into a fossil fuel import standard like you outlined?
Thank you for the question, Julian. Clean initiative is somehow very comparable with OGMP 2.0. This Nigerian representative, our panelists also mentioned this as oil producing country is trying to commit to OGMP 5, OGMP level 5, but unfortunately, this OGMP or green initiative, these are all somehow voluntarily push this company to commit methane reduction as well, but also this only talk about methane transparency. These are two common things, especially clean initiative, which was led by South Korea and Japan, does not really demand the members to commit to certain reduction target. That's somehow very weak point of this initiative. So we need to collaborate with the European Union and other Asian countries to think about how to realistically reduce this methane emission in the region, which can actually benchmarked by European import standard, but which can be also regional initiative. When our organization, Solutions for Our Climate, try to introduce OGMP, for example, in this region, or other NGO or other think tank want to introduce OGMP in China or Japan, but they all rejected because they did not want to open the data publicly. So data transparency is somehow very a crucial point for the company because they can really deteriorate their reputation in the market. On the other hand, Asian market is very different from Europe. Europe has biggest somehow market power as the biggest gas importer in the world, but Asia is somehow very separately can work on their own purpose, which means Asia somehow more diverse in terms of like energy security. So that's one reason why these companies are kind of delayed to commit to any methane reduction target. So we think we need some kind of a regional methane reduction initiative, not only limited to this clean initiative, which only demand this methane data transfer only among the company. We don't know if this clean initiative would be open to the public. We need to demand if company would like to open their emission data through this initiative. So that's somehow we see this weakness of this initiative. But on the other hand, in order to secure this Asian oil and gas market from this import standard, we have to build some kind of worldwide security within this climate target, but as well as energy security. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wenzel, I saw you itching to also add something.
Yes, it's a very interesting what you mentioned, and I would like to say that we think also that it's very important that the big importers like Korea, European Union, Germany, and also Japan and some others cooperating with the fossil fuel import standards, because we all together can make a big pressure on the producing countries. And it's very interesting to look on the other side here at the Japanese pavilion. They have a show place where they show their the data system of their satellite. And you can see what are the main emitter regions all over the world, what are the official data, and what the measured data, and that's a big difference too. It's very, very interesting. We worked all together to implement more satellite monitoring programs, and now we're getting better and better data systems so that we can follow the big emitters and ask them to stop the emissions of the gas and oil production or of the flaring and venting. That's an old practice from oil and gas production. But if we're working there together with all countries who are working on the methane reduction, that is very interesting. And from the Japanese data, for example, we can see that the best practice of gas production is 150 times better than the baddest standard. And under the baddest standards, there are all these really huge oil mares, you know the names, they are under in the line of the baddest production. So they can reduce, but they don't do it in the moment, and there we must have much more pressure.
Better closing remarks than I could have formulated, I dare say. So I want to thank all of our panelists in our first panel for coming here, for presenting what, well, different champion countries and members of the Global Methane Pledge are doing to address methane emissions. And would like to invite the audience to thank them with a round of applause. Thank you very much. All right, and yes, I will allow you to move on to your next events, and thank you very much for being here. Now, as the networking continues and concludes, let me introduce our second panel. Our second panel will focus on the implementation challenges in the different sectors emitting methane emissions. Those are, of course, energy, agriculture, and waste. We will be delving into the challenges in those sectors because while it's good that we have champions and it's good that countries are doing things, indeed, Queen has been playing in the back of my head throughout most of the first session. Of course, we're still failing. We're in the 3rd year of the Global Methane Pledge, and methane emissions are rising instead of falling. And we have 5 years to go. And how to get there is what we will be focusing on in our second panel. So thank you again. For our second panel, we have Desmond Alugnoa from GAYO, who is just arriving, just in time. Desmond, if I can ask you to the stage. We also have Jens Hürdler from Environmental Action Germany, my own organization, to speak about agriculture, and Mark Lawrence, director at the Potsdam Research Institute for Sustainability Studies. Thank you all for joining us. So we've heard a lot about what countries are doing to actually address the methane emissions challenge. Now we would like to go through the different sectors. Desmond, I don't want to rush you, but I would like to start with you with the waste sector. You represent GAYO, GAYO. All right. And we'll be speaking about the challenges of methane emissions mitigation from the waste sector, particularly in Africa. Right. So feel free to go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. My name is Desmond Alugnoa. I'm the Africa Program Manager for the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternative, which stands for GAYO. So we are a network of over 1,000 NGOs that are implementing zero waste solutions across Africa. And my work mainly is to support the cities and the mayors of the various cities to sort of transition into sound waste management mechanisms. So essentially, what we have observed in the past is that we have a continent that is still prioritizing landfilling, and as we all know, landfills are a hot spot for methane emission. Unfortunately, there's really not enough technical capacity for those same countries to sort of understand and spot these things and capture the emissions that are coming from that. But also even beyond that, with the current growth in population and the consumption patterns, we now also have a lot of the time dump sites, not necessarily landfills. And so you have not one source of emission, but also just several of them coming. So even if you had the means to monitor, it's also like a challenge to monitor. But one of the key things that we have also been struggling with, it's mainly just the fact that we are dealing with mixed waste in all diversity. And so for the pilots and for some of our zero waste models that have been able to scale, or those that are at the tipping point for scaling, one of the challenge has been how to really get waste separated at source. Because a lot of these things have fundamental principle of separation at source, working with waste pickers, and composting. Composting is one of our key things, composting or black soldier fly farming. And if you don't have clean waste, or if you are not able to separate the food waste and the organics from the plastics and all other contaminants, it becomes difficult to have a clean compost. And these are some of the challenges that we are having, and I'm happy to speak a bit deeper more.
How do you address those challenges? Like, what are the 3 measures that need to be taken to enable methane emissions from waste to go down?
Yeah, so one of our models, this mic seems not consistent. So one of our models, and maybe some people in this room probably heard that one of our zero waste models in Ghana recently won the Earthshot Prize. So we started with 3 of the same kind of project after we had implemented it and validated it, and then we took it to cities. So one city is Accra, one is Durban, and the other is Dar es Salaam. And how that model tackles these challenges in methane abatement is mainly by establishing waste buyback centers within communities. So in Accra, for example, we work with over 5,000 waste pickers. And the advantage of having those numbers is that because they work with tricycles, they use trolleys, and they are able to navigate in all sectors and sections of communities where normally big trucks of waste management companies cannot access. They are able to not only disseminate the message on source separation, but they are also able to really demonstrate how source separation works and help people to validate whatever waste separation methods that they have been using. And because we have the waste buyback centers within these communities, it's very easy for people to go there and drop. We prioritize really low-key or low-cost logistical things, provision. For example, we don't provide big waste bins that are fancy. We use sacks, normal sacks in most of the cases. And because proximity-wise, the buyback centers are near to some of these communities, they are able to go there and then drop off their waste. Usually at the buyback center, it's only few people there, just with a scale, and the various waste you bring, they weigh it and then they give it. It's not digitalized. We are hoping that we will get there. But if you were to bring plastics, it's the same way. If you bring waste, food waste, it's the same way. It's just that the prices are different. And then in each of the districts that we work, we have the material recovery facility, which is like a physical space where we have space for composting, we have space for also taking care of the other waste. So electronic waste have its hub within the same building, whereas you have space for baling or shredding the plastics. Most of the rest of the waste is really for the export market. We only have few companies on site who are recycling plastics into waste bins and plastic chairs and what have you. But for the food waste, that we collect from the communities through the buyback centers, but from the restaurants and the markets, it's mainly just they make a phone call, we go and pick it up. The compost is going well. We produce about 2,000 bags of compost per facility per month at the moment, and it's mainly for the local farmers. And one thing that have also come up recently is the fact that there is now a lot of urban gardeners in the city of Accra, because some communities decided to have community trainings on composting and keep their food waste because they understand how to segregate. So they're using the small spaces that they have at their backyards to actually farm vegetables and other things that they consume on a daily basis. So I think it's also now bringing in the angle of food systems and what have you.
All right, thank you. So trash separation, landfill management, proper composting, important measures to tackle that sector. Let's now look next at what can be done about agricultural methane emissions. Presenting some thoughts will be my colleague Jens Hürdler, Senior Expert at Environmental Action Germany. Jens, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you that you are here in the audience. Yeah, the most important at first is that we had to take action, and we had to take action together now. And that's not only in agriculture, it's we mentioned it all today in all sectors, so that we need to see that it's a cross-sectoral challenge, and every sector can contribute. Agriculture sector offers a lot of potential to reduce, and as many emissions arise here, especially in the animal husbandry, and we need to use technical but also consumer-based measures to reduce it. So on the one hand, we have the technical measures, and they're talking about to adapt stable management, to adapt feeding strategies, use more slurry in biogas plants, and what I mention is, or what I need to mention is that the benchmark must be every time the welfare of the animals, so that we don't incentivize intensive farming. We need to reduce it at the end of the use and the reduction. And especially in the last days here at COP, we heard a lot of the measure to reduce methane by feed additives. And in this point, I need to highlight that this is not the end pipe solution. And it's we need to say that it can be only a small part of solution to reduce. Especially in this point that there are no proven long-term studies in the moment. So, and if you talk about feed additives, that's the biggest problem is in the moment that we can't show how the rumen adapts on a long-term perspective. So the internal fermentation is not really long-term proven. So the biggest problem is that the rumen adapts in the short term, and afterwards the animal doesn't do this for what we are holding it for the society. So to deliver protein-rich food for humans out of grass and herbs. So I need to break in this point. What I mentioned first was that we need technical, as always, accompanied by consumer-based mitigations. Such as a dietary shift and a reduction in the consumption of dairy products, and which should lead to an increase in the quality of the product, of a milk product, and as thus enable the producers to achieve a higher amount for economic income, and we work together consumption reduction and economic welfare for producers. The 30% reduction commitment under the GMP is the global target, but in the current political and climate political situation, we have to be careful that individual countries might scale back their ambitions. And so other countries had to raise their ambitions. That must not mean that, however, that other can rest on their efforts or low efforts. To achieve the climate targets, the goals of the global methane pledge must be pursued ambitiously. To do this, the signatory states need a specific national methane plan for reduction, and we need concrete methane reduction targets, and the cross-sectoral strategies to reduce and to reach this target needs to include measures in all sectors, In agriculture especially, we need to reduce animal numbers. Only on this way we can reduce measurable the methane emissions from the agricultural sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Jens. So to summarize, we need a plan. We also need to eat less meat, much less meat, something that I've personally found difficult this COP due to lack of options. Be that as it may, let me ask you one quick follow-up question. I read in the news this morning that Denmark just adopted a methane tax on agriculture. Is this a model that other countries should copy?
I think so, yes. It's a right way to, on the one hand, to raise the ambition to reduce the production and to reduce the consumption because the prices raise. But I think Denmark proposed it to begin at 2030, and that's too late because we can't reach with this tax the global methane pledge ambitions. So, but it's the right way, yes.
All right. So, Mark, before we move to you, since we've lost a speaker on energy, let me be so cheeky to sort of invite myself onto the panel for 2 to 3 minutes to present like key measures to take in the energy sector before we ask you for a more sort of bird's eye perspective on how we're doing in achieving the global methane pledge. So, in the energy sector, basically emissions reductions are not rocket science. We're talking about fossil oil and gas production, also coal. And the solutions are known. Norway, for instance, shows that it's possible to have close to zero methane emissions in oil and gas production. We're talking there about monitoring, reporting and verification to know where leaks are. We're talking about leak detection and repair. Can be as simple as taking an infrared camera and sort of walking along the pipes, seeing where methane comes out, fixing the leak once it's detected. And of course, also the approach to venting and flaring. Venting and flaring is the main source of methane emission in oil and gas production, and routine flaring is basically an outdated practice that isn't necessary. In Norway, they have the approach that each individual flaring event needs to be notified to the regulator. It's a very different regulatory approach than other countries have. And lastly, pricing, of course. There needs to be an economic incentive. In Norway, methane emissions have been subject to a tax since the 1990s. This is something that the US has also been discussing. Let's hope the methane fee stays throughout the next administration. But that's, of course, key. Because if no one pays for the methane emissions, if it's free to pollute, then companies do not have an incentive to actually tackle it. So, let's move to our next panelist, Mark Lawrence, director at the Potsdam Research Institute for Sustainability. You've been listening to what has been presented, what countries are doing, what the challenges are in the different sectors. Of course, you're also an expert in your own right. What's your assessment, sort of in the bird's eye view? How are we doing? Can we meet the global methane pledge objective of reducing emissions by 30%?
Well, thanks, Julian, for asking. First, I'd like to start off with a small tip. You mentioned it's difficult to get away without much wheat here. At the traditional food stand in the food court, they have a wonderful plate of cooked vegetables and salads, so you can get away with it. Yeah. So, and all these little things are what we need to do, and I'll come back around to those little things in a moment. You asked sort of for the bird's eye perspective. So, first off, global methane pledge is commendable. It's tremendous that we've gotten that kind of an effort together. The pledge is for a 30% reduction in methane emissions by 2030 versus the 2020 levels. That would be great. I have my concerns whether we'll even fulfill that, but that would not be enough to make the contribution that we really need to make through methane for helping to keep the Paris Agreement goals. Methane is often discussed as a problem, and it is. It's a very serious problem. Methane is the second largest greenhouse gas forcer after carbon dioxide. It's responsible for about a quarter of our global warming at present. But methane is also an opportunity. And it's important to think of methane in that sense of an opportunity because it's a short-lived climate-forcing pollutant. We use this term SLCP, short-lived climate-forcing pollutants. Methane has a lifetime in the atmosphere of just over 10 years. Carbon dioxide, in contrast, has a lifetime of well over 100 years. Now, when you think about short-lived, we often think on political timescales, election timescales of 5 years or so. So 10 years seems kind of long in that perspective. But I'd like you to think of it in a different way in terms of an opportunity. Go back to 1992, and shortly after that, when we had the first climate conferences. At that time, 10 years seemed like a long ways in the future, and a lot would be done. We're now at COP29. The methane that was emitted then, with a 10-year lifetime means that every 10 years, 70% of the methane disappears. So that means we only have 5% left of what we emitted back then. If we had started on methane emissions reductions back then, we would be seeing the effects tremendously by now. And so we need to be more intense on methane emissions reductions. And that is where we go back from the opportunity to the challenge, because it's complicated. As we heard, even in the waste sector, it's complicated. We've heard in the agriculture sector, it's complicated. In the energy sector, it's complicated. And then on the markets, it's complicated. Our colleague told us about how important transparency is, but I'd also add monitoring to that. But nevertheless, if we're going to be able to capitalize on this opportunity, we're going to have to face these complications. We're going to have to partner together like we've done with the Methane Pledge and move forward on each of these sectors. And I think these commendable activities shows that we can move forward, we can make progress like that, and we need to continue to do so if we're going to actually fulfill the intention of the Methane Pledge.
Thank you. So, are we going to do it?
Are we actually going to fulfill the Methane Pledge? I'd say, sadly, I think given the current global political situation, it looks very unlikely. At the same time, the global political situation tends to encourage cooperation on coalitions of the willing, if we want to call them that. And so there is a chance that the communities who are focused on the common good, who are focused on actually bringing forward action, will respond to the global political situation and say, okay, they're not going to do it. And it's very clear that we can't rely on the global politicians to actually do this now, with the US likely pulling out of the Paris Agreement in the first place, and other things like that. And so we have a chance to do it. I don't think it's likely, and because it's not likely, I think it means even more we need to work together to put forward the efforts that we can. And all of these efforts we've been hearing about are exactly what we need if we're going to do it.
Yes, Global Methane Pledge, I think, now has 160 members after 2 more joining at this COP. The US is only one of those, even though engagement is important. There's a lot that can happen even without the United States engaging constructively on the international stage. All right, I'm looking into the audience to see if there are any questions that you would like to ask to our panelists. There does not seem to be an immediate response. So let me go back to the panel and ask you as well, Desmond and Jens. What is your feeling? How are we doing on the Global Methane Pledge, and what needs to happen more in terms of international cooperation? Maybe what can Germany do? What can other industrial countries do to mobilize emissions reductions in the waste sector, in the agriculture sector, beyond what is currently already happening?
I think the fact that we have several countries actually pledging, it's a positive step. Where we have the challenge is the fact that with all these pledges, you go to countries, NDCs. Currently, there are review processes in multiple countries in Africa, and there's no clear mainstreaming mechanism of methane abatement in the NDCs. So it's one thing saying that we're going to commit this amount or so into working on methane, but it's not clear enough for even other actors in like us or even the private sector to understand this is exactly what government intends to do, and this is where we can enter, and this is how we can contribute. For example, there are no policies or recommendations around separation at source, like I mentioned, right? There's nothing really specific on food waste and how to avoid food waste and whether there are benefits or punitive measures for that. There's also no specific information regarding landfilling as well. And so it's still very quiet around all those things. In a way, I would say still encouraging the current trend of attitudes, and there's nothing specific that goes towards changing people's attitude to how they handle waste or how they transport or see waste as a matter of fact. So I think that is where I feel like there's a gap. And for collaborative reasons, I would say that coming from West Africa, we've seen how much of an impact having North-South sort of collaborations have impacted in our various communities, or even how much our government value such collaborations. And I would say, if, for example, countries like Germany have advanced in certain policies, like the example you mentioned for Norway, when you are forming a collaboration with another country in Africa, perhaps that's one thing to look out for and encourage that some of the mechanisms be incorporated into whatever deal that is being struck.
Yes, you mentioned the NDCs there. Of course, that's, well, both a huge challenge and an opportunity. The NDCs that we have now, many of them do include methane. They do not include separate methane targets, and the majority of them do not include clear measures of how reductions are to be achieved in the different sectors. So, of course, that is an area where well, countries can come together and show what they're doing to the international community to hopefully well, produce a list of measures that will then add up to 30% by 2030. Jens, agriculture. Anything that can be done there?
Yeah, I think especially in agriculture, we know, everybody knows, and the possibilities and the options of measures which were in place, but not everybody is happy to set it in place. Especially, we have no concrete reduction target. We have no concrete idea on how we can set it in place that everybody act together. So I mentioned before, it's not only the farmer. It's also the industry. It's also the market. It's in the end, we all the consumers are relevant for the reduction of methane in the agricultural sector. It's a choice what we need to do, but we need to do it. So it's really relative to do it. And but what I want to mention is that if we talk about methane, it's not only the climate issue, it's also the health perspective. It's the biodiversity. It's the economic outcome from the crop yields. Because of methane is a precursor for ozone. Ozone is a negative impact on agricultural farming. It's a negative impact of our health. And I think on this way we need to come to the perspective of all the sectors to say we need to do it not only from climate perspective, we need to do it also from a perspective for society on health and so on. And so we need to use the options in politics what we have, or in policies what we have in the next years, especially in Europe. So we need to include a methane reduction target into the NEC directive. We need to talk about, in the international perspective, on the Gothenburg Protocol to include methane there, and so that we produce a pressure to the member states and to the states to have methane in mind if they want to do and to want to reach global methane pledge results and so on. So I think that's a really important thing that we have to think about.
So we need to mainstream methane abatement into, well, everything, ideally, for a number of reasons. I mean, in terms of health impacts, in Europe alone, we're talking about tens of thousands of people dying prematurely of respiratory conditions because methane is a precursor to ozone. And you've mentioned how thorny the difficulties of reducing methane emissions in agriculture are. I mean, that's one of the reasons that most scenarios see the huge initial reductions coming from the energy and the waste sector. But of course, we need to think about doing agriculture differently and not perpetuating the very intensive, very meat-based model that we have now. Yes, we have a question in the audience. Perfect. I was just about to ask. My colleague is bringing the microphone to you as we speak. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for this discussion. Specifically regarding the emissions reductions needed in agriculture, as you pointed out, Jens, we need much more than like one single end-of-pipe style solution where we say we change food additives and we're done. And I think at other parts of the COP, there's discussions about, how to do a big transition in the agri-food system. Of course, it's not just methane emissions. We need to think about CO2, but also N2O. And what I always come back to is the thought that agriculture needs its own just transition discussion, because at the heart of it, there's farmers, industries that are facing a loss of their livelihood. They need to have perspectives for the future. It's also really, of course, consumers play a big role there. But I'm just wondering what you think about that, and if you see some of these types of discussions already happening, or if you see opportunities to launch these bigger societal discussions on the agricultural transition, or whether it's just, it's a political topic that nobody wants to get burnt on, so people are avoiding it.
Jens, you want to take that?
Yeah, thanks for this question. Yes, it's a really hard discussion. And yes, you mentioned also that it's such a hot topic, especially in Germany in the moment, and also in the last year, the farmers' protests and so on. So it's really hard to talk about it. So we don't want to say something to the farmers that you need to do it. I can understand that this is a really hard burden for them to economic outcome and so on, to introduce a climate measurement and so on. But I think we need to talk about it. And this is the very beginning. And so we need to also to combine the societal discussion on it, because we all want to have not so big issues by health perspective, and I think that this is one point. So to keep the society into discussion on the health perspective. On the next one is the outcome, and so I think we can combine them. But it's really hot topic in the discussion. Yeah.
Yes, of course, agricultural politics in Europe are complicated by the fact that farmers have trucks and are not afraid to use them at all. I'm wondering, actually, Desmond, if agriculture, if sort of the large-scale change that we will need to have a more sustainable agricultural model, if that is something that is taking place in the African context at all, if it's something that you're also dealing with as an activist and as an organization?
I think for Africa, especially East and West, agriculture is sort of at the bottom of priorities, mainly because already the farmers are struggling. On daily basis, there's either flood on the west and drought in the south, or the other way around. So as a result, drastically, for example, animal farmers, cattle rearers, it has really, really reduced. A lot of people have to diversify and hop onto something else. It's the same with people who were farming rice, because there's either too much flooding and it doesn't even become beneficial, or there's too much drought, and at the same time, people are really going away from that. And then a lot of young people are also not finding agriculture as a lucrative business or something cool enough to do. So it's really not a big challenge as compared to the waste sector. Because where we see this usually is that we have a lot of food loss. Even though we produce not so much, there's still huge amounts of the food that's lost between farm and the market, and a lot of it sometimes it gets to the market fresh, but by the end of the day, because of the way our system works, it's heaped there in the sun, and then people are selling, and so half of it potentially could go bad at the end of the day. Those are the places that we really record a lot of the losses, and that's why a lot of priorities is given to the waste sector. And there is, however, a linkage. For example, in the material recovery facilities, a lot of the time, food waste will have to serve animal farmers before composting is done, because animal farmers really needed quality assurance in terms of having the MRF, which prioritizes separation at source, then ensures that there is quality food product for them to feed their animals, which is why they really have a solid partnership with most of the material recovery facilities. But the focus on agriculture as a means of methane abatement hasn't been at the top. I do remember that in the National Adaptation Plan in Ghana, there was a lot of focus on agriculture, but it's really not from the methane angle. It's really more around how to feed population and how to diversify, how to plant more drought-resistant crops and what have you. Yeah.
Yes, of course. I can imagine that just adaptation to climate impacts is a larger concern in many places, and also likely the competition with heavily subsidized EU and US agriculture, which I imagine doesn't make it easy to choose sort of going into farming as to make a living. Mark, do you want to weigh in on the agriculture discussion as well? Otherwise, I would ask for a round of closing statements to close out our panel.
I'd put in one point about the agriculture discussion, which is simply that I'm very glad that Jens brought out the point about air quality. That we really need to keep that in mind, that first off, we have the climate impacts, and the climate impacts on agriculture, as you just mentioned, that you see very prominently in many countries already. but we already long since have air pollution impacts on agriculture. Losses of crops due to ozone in the Mediterranean region can be up to 50% of the crop yield in a year already. And that may increase with increasing ozone, with increasing temperatures. Methane is the most important precursor of ozone. It's responsible for 50% of the ozone formation worldwide. It's very, very important that we keep that in mind. This is a climate conference. Of course, we're focused on climate, but the air pollution connection, the air pollution contribution to climate, and the contribution of climate change and climate forces to air pollution, and then in turn to industries, especially the agricultural industry, is very important as an incentive for trying to get down our methane emissions.
Indeed. So, we've been talking about many things to do, many possible and necessary measures to address methane emissions. I'm now going to ask all of you to pick one, the one change in the world that you want to see to pull the climate impact brake to bring down methane emissions. The number one thing that would be most effective in your view. Jens, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you. Yeah, from the agricultural perspective, I would mention that the most effective measure would be the dietary shift. So, because the most of the agricultural methane emissions, nearly 80%, comes from the animal itself, from the internal fermentation. So we can do a lot of adaptive feed strategies and so on, but I think to reduce methane from agriculture, we need to reduce the animal numbers. So, and this is something what we can introduce also in a, not from yet now to tomorrow, but we can to introduce it into the society, dietary shift, plant-based proteins, and so on. And I think the measures are on the table. So we can do it, and we need to act. And we need to act now.
Okay. Thank you. I would say zero waste solutions, more decentralized approaches to waste management, supporting and working with informal communities like waste pickers who are already doing this anyways, and so finding ways to integrate them into government waste management mechanisms and having them make more profit while acting on methane seems really doable for almost every African country, and especially looking at that, the political commitment is not as huge, and so I see governments being willing to integrate those waste pickers to do the work properly.
I'm going to go way outside of the box on this when you ask for the bird's eye perspective anyway. If you ask me for the one thing that would make the largest difference in methane emissions and methane impacts, it would be caring, or put differently, solidarity. That we care enough about the people who are suffering from the damage to their crops through air pollution, through floods, through droughts. That we care enough about the people who are suffering through waste problems that we have, that we care enough for the people who are challenged with their access to energy, to make sure that that happens in a way that is not environmentally damaging. That we care enough to keep in mind things that we haven't even talked about here yet, like the upcoming hydrogen economy. And that we pay attention to making sure that that is not a blue hydrogen economy where we have one more of these sectors of methane where we have to pay attention to. And that we care enough to actually be willing to take a step towards sufficiency. Everything we've talked about so far here almost everything has been on the supply side. The demand side is also awfully important. And that caring isn't going to solve at all these problems. But it's a contribution. If it's the one contribution that we haven't talked about much yet, and the one thing that I think would really make a difference, it would be if we could spread that attitude of caring and solidarity.
To add my own thing to the list, which is going to sound trite and banal now after what you said. But I want the European Union and Asian countries to sort of show their care by looking at the methane balance of their imports and adopting a joint import standard for fossil imports. Thank you to our panelists. I will close us out. We have lost some of our audience due to the no doubt excellent competition from other events taking place, but I would still like you to see them off with a round of applause. Thank you very much. And we're going to clear the stage for the next event. Have a great COP, everyone.
Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP29 in Baku. Germany. Climate solutions, fast and fair.